Coming up, it's the best of the rest. There are a number of top 100 free agents still on the market. Should Big Blue be buying? And if so, who's getting restructured to do it? More cap space is needed for Joe Schoen. There's shakeups at the top of the draft potentially that could benefit the New York Football Giants. And what if, just what if, a trade down scenario for Andy to consider? We dive in on it all coming up next. Yes, my friends. It's OGP, the One Giant Podcast, where you know that we are your hosts. Over here, Adam Armbrecht. Over there, Andrew Makowitz. We both are healthy, wealthy, and wise, feeling it on a Wednesday and talking about everything from the remaining free agent market to what could be the most important draft in New York Football Giants history. Andy, how are we?
Oh man, Adam, what setting the scene just the right way. And we talked about what kind of we wanted to discuss on the pod today. And you go through the wave of free agency, you see the flurry of activity, Monday, Tuesday during the illegal tampering period. You get into Friday and Saturday of that week where the secondary guys start coming off the board, where they were kind of waiting for the dominoes to drop. And now here we sit where there are some bargain opportunities. There's some players that are left on the market for injury risks or downplay, of their overall play last season, a little dip in their performance. But there are still players to be had here, and it's on cost-effective deals. And this is where Joe Schoen and the Giants really need to start paying attention before we get into the NFL draft.
Yeah, of course. Remember, obviously gave away one of those second-round picks in the Brian Burns deal. We're totally comfortable with that, but it also means you have one less asset to work with in the draft coming up here. So if you can fill in the margins before you get there, you want to have as few needs to fill in the draft so that you can feel as comfortable as possible to go ahead and make the moves that you want. We mentioned this too the other day, that Joe Schoen has been a guy from a GM standpoint that wants to move up, wants to move down. He wants to dance all over this draft board. So if you're going to be proactive, let's see if they can be proactive on the free agent market. We say this care of NFL.com. Greg Rosenthal listing what are the remaining off of his top 100 free agent list. And frankly, I'm just going to say this guy's name off the top because of how high he is. But you still got Stephon Gilmore. I mean, he's 33 years old, but he was the 16th ranked free agent. But the age, the position, obviously going to play a factor, Andy. But as we start to look through this list, among the remaining best available top 100, who was the first name for you that jumped out that you think, hey, if we get a little bit extra money in the coffers here, smart buy for Joe Schoen?
Yeah, well, so this one is an interesting one. So the first name that I came up with was a cornerback, because clearly cornerback feels like an area of need for the Giants.
Okay.
And I look squarely at Christian Fulton, the cornerback that was formerly of the Tennessee Titans. He's only 25 years old. He comes from LSU. He was a second round pick. Adam, the reason why he's still available, you may say, well, 25-year-old, cornerback, they don't grow on trees. He had a 46 Pro Football Focus rating, which not good.
Fine.
He got
Fine.
benched. He had injury concerns. He had a whole host of challenges that he faced last season after putting in decent tape in 2022 and 2021. And so you may say, well, why? The first thing is there's familiarity there. If the Giants are going to bring him in for a visit, it's because of defensive coordinator Shane Bowen. Shane Bowen was with the Titans when Christian Fulton was drafted. He was the linebackers coach. Then he moved to defensive coordinator position. And Christian Fulton played well in the first 2 years in Shane Bowen's system. So for me, it's one of those things where it's like, was it just a regression because the Tennessee Titans weren't very good last season? Was it because they couldn't, was there something wrong with the scheme? What was the issue that they were having? To me, this is one of those where you can buy low on still a young guy, 25 years old right now, probably only going to need, $1 to $2 million to be able to fill that void. So for Adam, this to me is one of those young players you bring in, a la Jason Pinnock a couple years ago that kind of got released from the Jets. This to me seems like a smart buy. And if he does come in, it means Shane Bowen still believes in his abilities.
Yeah, of course. And I think that's always what you like, right? A guy in-house that says, hey, especially now at this point, like we're not talking about first wave of free agency, going to cost big dollars here. And you have someone on your staff convince you, well, a $15, $20 million buy here is really going to be the answer for us. But now If you're talking about in the margins and still a young player, if your new DC comes to you and says, listen, we get this guy at the right price point, at a minimum, we're adding a healthy competitive body into the room that we think could overtake some of the guys that we've talked about before have been underperforming over the last few seasons for the Giants. So I'm 100% willing to go down that road with you. Would be very interested to see what that price point ends up being. For me, I'll stay in the secondary to start here along with you. Now, the Giants did bring in Jalen Mills over the course of this offseason. Veteran player, a little bit of cornerback, a little bit of safety, kind of mixing it in here, setting a nice baseline for this team. But we know you lost Xavier McKinney in the offseason. I do look at a player like Julian Blackmon, formerly of the Indianapolis Colts, and even though he did have an Achilles injury that was lost there for a season in between, it's interesting to me to think about a player that if you go over right now, you want to talk about that he had a 68.3 PFF grade in 2023. Obviously, the gap year there with the injury, the one prior to that, 60.7. There's certainly some opportunities here for the Giants. And if, again, price point relative, if I say, now I know they have Javarius Owens as well, who they brought in a year ago in the draft. But if I believe in Dane Belton and I have Pinnock, this Blackmon has a track record. Like, he's played significant reps. I wouldn't hate a three-headed monster. And I think you would see with Fulton, as opposed to this, would you agree that if you sign Blackmon, you'd say, great, we can probably wait on a real safety splurge, quote unquote, if we needed to in the draft for another year or another offseason. If you brought in Fulton, it wouldn't really change the narrative around when you go to the draft. Cornerback's still going to be high on your board potentially of targets that you need to address within the first 3 rounds, let's say, maybe 4.
Yeah, it feels like some of these are more of like the 1 year, let's fill the gap, let's see what we have. There's other ones where
Right,
it's like,
right.
hey,
You
this person
prove
could
it
be
year
on a
for you to go
multi.
make more money, and we get the best value out of you in the short term.
Correct. For Julian Blackmon, I think that's a good pick, Adam. Obviously, he's still, only 25 years old. So you're talking about a guy that performed well, still probably has room to grow. The one challenge I have with Julian Blackmon is what he's asking for. And if that price tag
Right.
continues to come down, then I think the Giants are in the business. Spot Track has him at about $6.7 million is what his annual salary would be, which feels a little bit high for the safety position, right?
And
But
Adam would not be, as GM of the New York Football Giants, signing Blackmon for $6.7 million. We talk about getting down closer to 4, right? Then I think maybe there's a conversation to be had there if you're the Giants.
yes, I think you pretty much nailed it on that one. I sit here and I say, if there's a deal to be had, I am absolutely in. If there is not a deal to be had, Adam, number 87 overall, probably in the 20 to 25 range of remaining free agents, is
I had to
one
Google
Micah
it.
Hyde, safety from the Buffalo Bills. Obviously, the familiarity with Joe Shane and everyone else. He's 33 years old. He is an older, established veteran that has been serviceable. He is one of
Yep.
those guys on a 1 year deal that you think about, can we solidify this room? We don't necessarily know if Dane Belton's ready. Jalen Mills is going to play kind of this hybrid role. But for half the price that Julian Blackmon is for a 1 year deal, we can at least get some of the production out of the safety room. For me, there are always options. The young, up and coming upside guy that's going to cost a little bit more. And then there's the veteran guy that you're hoping to squeeze 1 more year of productive performance on the field from. A guy like Micah Hyde is someone that I look at for that.
33 is too old. I can't do it. Anybody who's within, earshot of my age, you just can't. I'm sorry, we can't have you on the football team. Though we understand the connections. And by the way, as we'll move away here, just hitting another couple of names before we get into what has been a fascinating turn of events when it comes to the top of this draft, we obviously want to discuss. How about Teair Tart, who got the midseason release from Tennessee? And so there's some questions here about what the heck went on. 27-year-old defensive tackle. You want to go back to 2022 when we're talking about a guy that played to a 73.1 PFF grade and is just 27 years old. This feels like the kind of thing, like we've talked about this before. We know we lost Ashawn Robinson in free agency after a 1-year stop. What could be possible for him going forward? Okay, you brought in Brian Burns. Oh, maybe Azeez Ojulari in that 4-man front. Maybe just another big, thick body. And you start talking about having that front, that trench, really be a more dynamic defensive unit across the NFL at the right price. Again, all of these at the right price. I don't mind it.
So listen, I think Tart actually, out of all the names you mentioned, is the least likely, only because it's not about the performance on the field. You may get a better performance than, say, Micah Hyde would give you at his
Yes,
age.
yes.
But the fact that he got cut as a younger player because of what people are deeming effort issues, attitude
Sure.
issues, wanting
Not
a new
great.
big contract. Like all of those things are the exact opposite of what it feels like Joe Schoen is looking for when he's bringing players into the
Yeah.
building. But
Yeah.
hey, listen, when your job's on the line, Adam, maybe sometimes you're willing to, you know, be more flexible in terms of getting the
And guess
players
what?
into
Yeah,
the right.
100%, right? It seems a little bit less likely, obviously, but guess what? Again, at the right price, maybe a non-guaranteed or maybe incentives based. Hey, you want to come into the camp and all of a sudden you're not giving the effort like we wanted? Guess what? We can cut you too, right? Like, and that's hard to just say as a blanket statement. Obviously, we understand that, but when you're a player of his skill set and age and you're still on the market, there's a little bit of like look in the mirror moment for you here when you have to try to reevaluate how you're going to get yourself back to maybe getting a big contract. So again, some stopgap options here. There's a couple other names, but they all regard this similar position. So I'm going to pause our top 100 discussion and we're going to flip our talk over to the NFL draft in just 1 minute. And then it's going to inform. We're going to seesaw back and forth, Andy, until we end up right back here talking about that top 100. Before we do, though, we're also going to talk about Personam. Oh, today's episode is brought to you by Personam, and that is because Personam is an AI-driven cyber threat detection engine. Personam improves your vision into your network security environment and allows you to see cyber threats that other tools and platforms just can't do. Personam is always vigilant, always learning. Check out Personam today, as maybe the Giants should be doing. We need threat detections. Where are the weakest points of this Giants roster, and how do we improve it? Speaking of improving it, NFL draft. Oh, it's long been standing here that Caleb Williams is going 1 and Drake May is going 2, and you're going to have Daniels at 3. Don't even bother trying to trade for quarterbacks. And then the Arizona Cardinals are going to steal Marvin Harrison Jr., maybe the best rated player in the draft. Now there's a big shakeup. Now everybody wants to get up there for the quarterback. There's a world here, Andy, whatever world it may be, that the Giants can just sit there at 6 and end up landing what some people within the last few weeks regarded as the best player in the entire draft.
Well, it might even be one of 2 players that people have talked about being the best player in
Let's
the
keep our
draft
options
because
open, right? Let's enjoy
well,
ourselves.
well, because as the kind of media turns around and they focus their attention on the draft and they look at who filled what needs, everyone focuses squarely on the top 10 of the NFL draft. And I think early on, everyone was locked into saying Caleb Williams was 1, Drake May was 2, Marvin Harrison Jr. is one of the generational talents sitting there. And now, the wave is basically to talk about Marvin Harrison Jr. not doing anything at the combine, Harrison Jr. today not doing anything at the pro day for, Ohio State and the Buckeyes. And you start hearing whispers about all of these teams in, whether it's the Commanders or Patriots, having top 30 visits, dinners, bringing in JJ McCarthy into the building. You hear other people saying Jaden Daniels to them is clearly the number 2 quarterback in this draft. And all of a sudden, it feels like the wave of momentum right now is shifting towards people shying away from Drake May, shying away from Marvin Harrison Jr. And that may present the opportunity that the Giants at 6 might have a chance at one of those 2 if things fall their right way. So my question to you is,
Yeah.
what's the likelihood that one of those 2 players is there? And if they are you immediately running to the podium, regardless of which one it is, and handing in your sheet as Joe Schoen saying, I will take that player?
It's interesting on the QB front because Drake May is also I'm trying to remember how old Drake May is coming into the draft here. Caleb Williams is the second youngest, I think, behind JJ McCarthy. And then you have Drake May, and everyone regards him as one of the top prospects, obviously. Did I have that right?
He's 20. He's 21. He'll be 22 right at opening.
Okay.
At the
Yeah. So
opening
he's
day.
right there, though, too. Another one of the young prospects. So when we've talked about JJ before, I often keep bringing up, well, he's just 21 years old. So if you get him at the right spot and you can develop him, but that's also because we think about these 3 quarterbacks being clearly gone by the time you have an opportunity to take them. By all accounts, yes, you would race up to go get Drake May if the Giants perceptually believe like we never had a shot at him, and that's why you're hearing the narratives that you do, even though the Giants are doing all their due diligence and talking to every quarterback and going to watch Caleb Williams throw, all these things. The funny thing to me would be what happens before it gets to 6, right? So how did they end up getting there? Well, if the Arizona Cardinals trade out of 4 potentially, well, we kind of assume it's for somebody to come get a quarterback. So do the Giants trade up a little bit to Arizona because Drake May maybe falls there? Does another team that wants to go get him trade in? Then what do the Chargers do at 5? And then there's that world at 6 where, to your point, like Marvin Harrison Jr. is now there, although it seems likely he would go to the Chargers, who need a number 1 option. Obviously, some people are even saying that maybe Neighbors is the better rated prospect now because of the absence not making the heart grow fonder when it comes to Marvin Harrison Jr. Yes. Just to answer it short, I'm probably elated with either one of those players falling to 6 and the Giants just being able to walk up and grab that guy, because Drake May is such a higher graded and valued prospect right now than whatever projection JJ McCarthy may have, or Penix Jr. or Bo Nix, right? These are talents you don't think the Giants have an opportunity to get. The difference might be for me, if Marvin Harrison Jr. was there. While I love the idea of it, I also have to acknowledge that we've said Neighbors is really good, that Adunze had an incredible combine. So there is this world where the value of that and a team maybe wanting to come get that value, Marvin Harrison Jr., I might open myself up a little bit more to being flexible. If a team said, boy, we really want that number one option, we'll come to get him for you, and I can still find that weapon somewhere else.
Yeah, well, the interesting piece of this too is we've talked about the Giants staying at 6 in the selection of players. There's 3 quarterbacks and 3 wide receivers, so to speak, that if you like all 3 quarterbacks and you like all 3 wide receivers, the Giants, if they stand
No
pat,
lose.
are guaranteed to get one of them. What is
Yep.
fascinating is the Giants have met with JJ McCarthy. Obviously, it's out now. It was one of the official 30 visits. He walked around the facility. They might have done dinner. There might have been some hand holding. There might have been, assurances and promises, whatever you
I
want
heard
to
Brian
say.
Dable, he knelt down like Jim in The Office to Pam on the sidewalk, and it was like, oh, I was just tying my shoe. But he did give a lot of the suggestive language from a body language standpoint to give JJ all the feels.
I didn't know if they were handing out flowers like it was The Bachelor for the top 30
That's right.
visits and whether or not he got one. But if you believe the Giants are in on JJ McCarthy and you believe what you're hearing, that now, oh, look, everyone from the Commanders to the Patriots and others are now in on JJ McCarthy as well. Now you're talking about 7 players that are
Sure.
involved in the
Sure.
sphere of where the Giants are. And if JJ McCarthy starts moving up the board at him, that means the Giants might have their pick are of 1 or 2 of these players, as opposed to taking the last one of the group. And so for me, that's a fascinating situation where if JJ McCarthy moves up the board, now you're talking about 4 quarterbacks that people potentially love, 3 wide receivers, and the Giants can have their pick of 1 or 2 of them if that's how it ends up falling.
Question back in your direction. How bullish are you on Joe Shane's ability to identify which wide receiver to take at 6 if multiple are there, having just gone through this experience where he was very comfortable to take whoever at 7 for offensive linemen? And then we now understand that Evan Neal's probably fighting for his starting job and maybe even roster position coming into training camp.
This is what we have to say. In Joe Shane, we trust on this one. We have to feel that
Was
he
that
is
right?
confident. I have liked Roma Dunze. I've said that multiple
Yep.
times. I think he is a big body, aggressive wide receiver, can run all the routes. Like, I am a big fan of him. I know some people are saying, well, no, I'm not really interested. He's a plan C or plan D. I think he's a great option. I think it just becomes harder if Malik Neighbors is there and you're kind of making a decision on what's going to happen. I could totally see
Yeah.
the Giants going LSU wide receiver again in the early first round, trying to capture and conjure up the visions of Odell Beckham. So for me,
Mm-hmm.
I'm okay with whatever happens. I would honestly be very happy with any of the top 3 wide receivers. When we get into the quarterback situation, if JJ McCarthy's the only one there, I don't necessarily know how I feel about it. But again, would be a nice problem to have if JJ McCarthy is putting his hat in the ring for one of those top 3 or 4 picks.
And isn't that, yeah, that's ultimately right. If these names get into the mix, by the way, just objectively, there's a world where some team, Joe Alt may end up not getting picked until 7 or 8. I mean, maybe the Chargers do take him at 5. It's all going to play itself out. But there's a world where there's just going to be certain players that you don't hear a name get called until the back end of the top 10 that you go, oh, well, that was, you took, Giants perspective. Hey, 5, 6, 7 guys. We feel good about any of them. Somebody picking in the top 10 going, I'll just sit here. I'll just sit here and wait. Wide receivers, quarterbacks, have at it. I'm about to get a cornerstone, what's regarded as obviously the best offensive lineman in the draft. Feels like a very plug and play. Don't worry about it. Protect your blind side, all those things. So it's not just about the Giants. The NFL draft overall is going to offer somebody some incredible value. That being the case, let's tie it back to the top, boys. We said top 100 talents, and there was a lot of names that we didn't bother mentioning here. You just, though, did elicit conjuring the connections to LSU. Well, Odell Beckham Jr. is still out there in the top 100. He wasn't the name I was going to bring up. I will footnote bring up, because I didn't say it before, J.K. Dobbins, obviously the torn Achilles. He's another guy that at 25 years old, if you told me right price point, prove it deal, I throw him right into the mix with Singletary for the Giants backfield. I think you'd be really excited if you can get a healthy season out of him. But Odell Beckham Jr., Tyler Boyd, You also have Michael Thomas, who's now older, but still very productive and showed some flashes this past season. The picture that I want to paint here is, if the Giants like the idea of trading down, and say it goes kind of the way it has looked here, and somebody wants to come up for Neighbors, for whoever, or for a quarterback, and they're willing to trade back, are there any of those top 100 talents at the wide receiver position that you look at and go, hey, that's not a bad pivot option here? We're still going to want to bring in a talent inside of this draft class. But if I can get a little bit more money freed up, and we just saw a guy like Mike Williams, even off a bad year, off an injury, he could get potentially, with all the incentives, $15 million from the New York Jets, a team that does feel strikingly desperate in this offseason.
Well, to be honest with you, all of the different wide receivers that are still available on the market, to me, don't solve the Giants' biggest problem, which is a bona fide number one guy that when
Of
things
course.
go awry, you can get the ball to, he can get open and he can make a play. I think all of these guys are complementary pieces that wouldn't be bad to fill out the room if they're going to take a deal for $5 million and be the veteran in the room that's going to be able to help everyone.
Mhm.
Tyler Boyd really had a struggling year. Odell Beckham uh, was okay with the Baltimore Ravens, but he's obviously back on the market after not being able to live up to the contract that they gave him. Mike Thomas, he's the one guy that I kind of look at and I'm like, if you look at the last couple of years, he started 7 games, 3 games, didn't play in 2021, and in 2020 he had 5 games that he started. You're talking
Yeah.
about hasn't really played a full season since 2019 when he went for 1,700 yards, Adam. He is 5 years away from being a significantly productive guy. He looks to me like someone that would want to go to a team that's competing for a championship to try to take, a prove it deal, reset his market value, and then hopefully be successful and go reset his value. For him to sign with the
Mhm.
Giants, does he have confidence that the Giants have figured out their quarterback room? Does he think that he'll be the number one, getting over 1,000 yards if healthy? I just don't see that for him. There's probably better options for him to look at.
Yeah, 100%. You think about OBJ, as we mentioned his name as well, right? Goes to the Rams, goes to the Ravens, right? Back of the career, trying to catch on at the right spot and maybe find a spark for himself. And I agree with you from that standpoint. At 31 years old, this is like last shot here for Thomas potentially at any kind of real substantial payday. The one that I did think was interesting, Tyler Boyd is an interesting one to me. Had a bad season last year. Now, again, like you say, he's not a number one. He's playing out in Cincinnati with T. Higgins there, with Jamar Chase. The reason why I find it interesting is because I wonder if he's still lingering out there and how Cincinnati feels about him. It doesn't seem like there's a return potential. But remember, T. Higgins they're trying to work on a trade here with T. Higgins. So if you clear him out and Tyler Boyd has familiarity, I keep having this kind of vibe that maybe he's just waiting for that to resolve. And then there's an opportunity for him to end up back in Cincinnati. He's not the right answer, but I think that he probably maybe ends up coming with, like, from the cost versus production standpoint, you probably could strike a pretty good value on him this offseason. That being said, to come back to where I started, if we're talking about trading down, none of these, to your point, I don't go, well, we're going to trade out of the top 10. We're going to go maybe get Bowers. Like we talked about this the other day. Maybe cornerback is going to be there in the teens if we make that kind of move. Okay, great. Getting one of these guys wouldn't change my mindset of, well, we didn't solve that problem, right? We didn't solve that problem yet. And in some ways, you could even make the case, just like a Darren Waller, when you make a trade for a player, you bring in a player and you get kind of excited about what he could be, but whether it's production, whether it's health, all of a sudden this thing is hanging over you, right? It's like until the other shoe drops. And once it does, you realize that you're actually devoid of talent at that position. So I find it fascinating to see how the Giants choose to address it. It's why, for both of us, I think wide receiver just remains so prominent when you think about those 3 players near the top.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, the thing for
Yeah.
me, Adam, is it feels like still with the free agents that are available that the Giants can find what they need in the cornerback room or the safety room. It feels like they can
Yes.
find what they're looking for as a complement to Deontay Banks. They're not looking for someone to be better than Deontay Banks. They're looking for someone that can play on the other side of him. In the safety
Mhm.
room, they're probably looking for someone that's more of a rotational piece, maybe an older veteran that can spell Dane Belton, that can switch over with Jason Pinnock, that allows Jalen Mills to switch around. When we talk about the wide receiver room, it just feels like Tyler Boyd, Odell Beckham, Michael Thomas, any of these guys, they don't fill the need of what we need, which is that bona fide number one guy that can grow and build on this offense. So to me, I'm looking at it that, yeah, even if the Giants trade back, they're still in the market. Tyler Boyd wouldn't preclude me from going first round, and even then again in the third round for another wide receiver to fill out this roster. So that's kind of where my head is at. Good options on defense, a little bit more needed on offense, I think.
Yeah, and it's funny. You could sign any one of those players and then still say, I think we should stay at 6 and take a wide receiver. So that's probably
Right.
reason enough to not necessarily go down that road. And I agree with you. I think free agency right now could offer some real bargain opportunities for that secondary to cement it and help kind of manipulate where the value is going to be for the Giants and what they feel like they need to attack in next month's draft. That being the case, my friends, despite what Andy may not want to be the case, at least right now, all the buzz is around the New York Football Giants taking visits. They got JJ coming in. They're looking at all these quarterbacks. Now, Andy, I'm talking about pristine tinfoil hat that says it's all about the game, right? You got to work it. You got to throw out the signals. I believe it's all a bunch of nonsense because it doesn't matter in the end. But I do acknowledge that if you don't do the visits and you don't act like you care about the quarterbacks, at least from a smart front office standpoint, scouting all the players that are available in the top 10, it would probably at least just send a signal like the Giants don't know what they're doing. Let's not bother being concerned with them at all. So we'll see how it plays out. It's a very intriguing right now to me, top of this draft. And what gets ultimately confirmed or denied about JJ McCarthy, that's the linchpin here to all of this. Because if he does become cemented in the top 5, top 6, then whether it's trade down, trade out, stick and take, the Giants are going to have real action there at that 6th overall pick one way or the other. So when we talk about next month's draft, we're talking about franchise-altering decisions getting made for the Giants and several other teams. And I think that's why the fan base is so on pins and needles right now, because it's just, hey, we are one move away from making the best or worst decisions of our lives. That being said, you know what you do, Andy? You get over to YouTube and you go ahead and subscribe to the One Giant Podcast. You get us on your podcast feeds, wherever those needs are fulfilled. You also get us over on Twitter/X at AndyMac214, at Adam Armick, and at One Giant Podcast. Give us a follow over there. And oh, by the way, a big help for us, go to Spotify, subscribe to the podcast link, turn on the auto downloads. If you're enjoying us here, just give us that support over there because it helps the collective movement of what we're trying to accomplish with the podcast. So really, really appreciate everyone doing that and supporting our sponsors as well. However, until next time, until the best times, as Andrew Makowitz would want, need, and nay, demand the people know.
As always, let's go Big Blue.